What if I told you that one of the most powerful psychological maps of addiction wasn't written in a modern lab, but way back in the 4th century? Today, we're exploring a 1600-year-old text that offers this profound guide to a very, very modern struggle.
So let's start with a feeling that's probably pretty familiar. It's that kind of internal bargaining we do, you know? When we know we should stop doing something, but we're just not quite ready to let it go. It might sound a little something like this.
Yeah, that's the prayer of the person who wants to quit drinking but decides, you know what, the real work will start tomorrow. It's always tomorrow.
Or this one. This is the feeling of someone desperate to escape drugs, but they're absolutely terrified of what life feels like after the high is gone. They crave freedom, but they're afraid of the emptiness.
And then there's this one, the promise we make to ourselves to start the diet on Monday right after one last weekend binge. So where do these incredibly modern-sounding prayers actually come from?
Well, the answer is pretty surprising. They don't come from a modern recovery group or some psychologist's office. Nope, they come from the 4th century, from the pen of a theologian.
See, the prayer we've been hearing is really just a modern paraphrase of a famous cry for help from St. Augustine's autobiography, The Confessions. His actual words, written way back in 397 AD, were, "Give me chastity, only not yet."
Augustine lived over 1600 years ago, and yet the way he describes being trapped by a habit of his will being, and this is his word, fettered, it aligns almost perfectly with the modern clinical understanding of addiction. It's amazing.
What's so crucial here is how he describes this internal battle. For Augustine, this wasn't just a simple moral failing. He saw it as a kind of psychological prison, a chain that he had forged for himself, link by painful link.
He starts by describing the early stages of his struggle, which he called the misty fogs of lust. This is such a great way to put it. It's that brain fog where the addiction starts to warp your perception of everything. This ancient poetry is just fascinating because it perfectly describes what modern science calls the narrowing of focus. You know, when the brain's reward system gets hijacked by addiction, it becomes genuinely hard to tell the difference between real love and the chemical rush of the habit. He totally got it.
In this slide, this just brilliantly illustrates his core insight. He broke down exactly how a single bad choice forges itself into an unbreakable chain. It starts with a weird impulse, which then becomes a craving. You feed that craving, and it becomes a custom or a habit. And if you fail to resist that habit, well, then it becomes a necessity, a true addiction.
You can just feel how torn apart he was. He called it his two wills battling inside of him. There was the person he wanted to be, and then there was the person the habit forced him to be. And that conflict was just ripping him apart.
And here's the thing, this wasn't just poetry. It was an uncannily accurate 4th century description of a battle between two different parts of our brains. The new will he talks about, that's the prefrontal cortex, the part that makes long-term plans. The old will, that's the limbic system, your lizard brain that just screams for immediate reward.
So this internal battle just builds and builds until it hits this huge climax, a total breaking point for Augustine. And it all went down in a garden in Milan.
He describes his old habits almost like they're ghosts, physically pulling on him, whispering to him, begging him not to leave the familiar, toxic comfort of the addiction. It's the voice of the habit literally trying to survive.
And then, at his absolute lowest point, just weeping in this garden, he hears a child's voice chanting, "Take up and read." And he takes it as a divine command to finally seek help from outside of his own broken will.
For Augustine, this was his breaking point, that moment of complete surrender that changed everything. But the story doesn't end there, because it makes you wonder, what happens after you survive a battle like this?
I mean, his profound wisdom on the psychology of addiction is undeniable, right? But we have to ask a tough question. Did surviving this intense battle leave him with a biased, or maybe even a traumatized view of what normal human life looks like?
Well, the historical evidence suggests his personal history was pretty extreme. He spent 15 years in a relationship with a woman, and yet they only had one child, which was really unusual back then. This was also during a time when he was influenced by the Manichaean religion, which actively condemned procreation.
And this history might have led to what psychologists call reaction formation. It's a defense mechanism where you fiercely and publicly condemn in other people the very thing you once practiced yourself. So he went from 15 years of non-procreative sex to becoming one of its most severe critics.
So when we read Augustine, it's really helpful to separate his brilliant wisdom on the mechanics of addiction from the projections of his own personal trauma. We can absolutely keep his psychological map of habit, but maybe we take his views on pleasure with a big grain of salt.
This is one of his most controversial quotes, and it really shows you how deeply he feared that any enjoyment, even the bonding love inside a marriage, could be a trap. For him, the line between healthy pleasure and addiction had been completely erased.
And it leaves us with this final, crucial question about the nature of wisdom that we gain through suffering. Does the person who hits rock bottom become the best guide for the rest of us, or do they forever see danger where others just see simple, healthy joy? It's a question worth considering. Thanks for joining this explainer.